as you can see, there are many dynamics to doing that work, and you know, the one aspect of it is it's a very simple process. It's a very emotional process, but the other aspect of it is what's occurring in my body, being able to listen to and watch what's occurring in my client's body, in my patient's body, knowing when to push, when to back up. It becomes a very nonverbal dance, and it starts with what I bring to the table, with what I sit down in front of those individuals with. That's where it starts, and then it ends with where they're at and their process. When I can join their process, then I can be more effective. So overall, attachment therapy is so much more than just working on a child. I can't help the children of those two ladies develop any kind of foundation until I can help those two ladies develop a stronger foundation within themselves. And I would do several sessions with them individually, even much more intense sessions. That was that was scraping the surface to just kind of model the experience. But this work could go, a single session could go an hour, 2 hours. If it was an intensive session, it could go 8 hours. It could go all day. So that was just scraping the surface, but I would do many intensive sessions with them before I'd ever even bring their children in. And then once I brought their children in, then you can kind of understand and grasp where they would be when asking their child to express their emotions. And then you can also see more readily why at that point a parent wouldn't be inclined to force hold their child, because their framework of reference has changed. It's operating from a different viewpoint. It's no longer looking at the child as angry and controlling. It's looking at them as scared. And that makes a world of difference. Some tools for the road. Once I do the deeper dyadic regulatory work, doing some of the more trauma-based work, some of the more fear-based work, some stress-based work, there are some tools that I will use and oftentimes send families home with to put into place. And those are homework assignments, which could simply be having the parent sit beside the child and hold the child's hand for 5 minutes. I may start there. It could be coming in as soon as they come home from work, going in and taking 5 minutes just for themselves. So homework assignments that are directed towards building more regulation, building more awareness and mindfulness and understanding. Cognitive negative awareness, that kind of got tied into the process, but essentially cognitive negative awareness is when you allow yourself to honor the negative thought processes that you have rather than try to replace them by something positive. A lot of times when we think something negative, when we feel something negative, we want to push it away. Rather than do that, we honor the fact that a negative emotion, a negative feeling, it's a biological reality. It is a cellular communication. You can't just take that negative thought, even though it's a thought. That negative thought started here in the body. You can't just take it and replace it with a positive and expect for everything to be okay. You've got to honor that negative. It's like Stephen Covey says, upset feelings never die. They are buried alive and come back as something uglier. And as long as we take those negative thoughts and we try to supplant them with positive ones, or we try to push them away or bury them, they're just going to build up. They're going to build up and build up and build up until they have to demand attention. So an exercise of cognitive negative awareness would, oftentimes I'll encourage a parent, stand in the mirror first thing in the morning and say, I feel scared 20 times. I had one mom said, well, I don't feel scared. I said, well, just stand in the mirror and say it 20 times. And we'll talk about it next week. The next week we're on the phone. It's a coaching call. We're on the phone. She said, well, I've been doing that exercise. She said, I think I've been afraid my whole life. I think I've been afraid my whole life. But we go through life unconsciously not being aware of those things. Relaxation and breathing. Saw a lot of that just in the therapy. the therapy component. So much of the therapy component just gets carried over to the day-to-day, just to what we're doing in the day-to-day experience. Mindfulness is paying attention. Once you start to have some of the core connections like these ladies had to the anger or to the shame or the self-blame, then when those things come up, you can be connected to them. Mindfulness is the ability to slow down and pay attention to what you're thinking and feeling. Because when you can be more mindful, then you can take more responsibility over your actions and reactions to other people. Journaling is a very cognitive tool, but it helps to just get the information out, to write about the thoughts and the feelings. None of these stand alone. They're tools after we've done the deeper work, after we've laid the foundation for the other work. Creating narratives, what we did during the work, is telling the story. Telling the story, and I like to encourage parents to create narratives for their children by telling their children narrative stories, which would be stories that are reflective of the child's experience, but they're not talking about the child's experience directly. So they make the story up of another little boy, or they make the story up of ducks and mice and a family of ducks, and they create a narrative around the child's experience. And by doing that, you create a very non-threatening opportunity for the child to internalize a perspective on what they've experienced. Gives them an opportunity to hear it in a different framework. And exercise and nutrition. Huge components of our ongoing regulatory development, huge components of our stress, huge components of how we engage with others in movement, in relationships. A homework assignment I might give parents is turn off the television for 10 minutes and take a walk around the block together. That's it. You don't have to turn it off for an hour. You just turn it off for 10 minutes and take a walk around the block, and that's it for the day. That's exercise, and it's also time. Also time. And then nutrition. We know that white refined foods, starches, are not good for children with trauma histories. They're not good because they overwhelm the system. They tax the system. And what do these children crave? Starchy, over-processed foods. Because they're seeking to try to build comfort. They're seeking to try to build regulation. So Dr. Atkins had something when he was talking about reducing carbohydrates, especially for these children. Because they're overwhelming. As long as the child is finding their needs through foods, through lots of carbs and lots of sugars, they don't have an opportunity to connect. And so what I like to encourage in that regard is when a child hoards food or they overeat, not take the food away, but feed the child. Sit and eat with them as they're eating. Why? Because you're developing that regulation between your two bodies. And slowly over time, the regulation you create with your body for that child starts to interrupt that intense need to have that food as a filler. So you can feed them, you sit beside them, those kinds of things. These are some effective adjunctive therapies. And again, these are adjunctive therapies. I don't do any of these therapies first and foremost, but I think they can be effective adjuncts. Meaning when you've done the deeper work, when you've done the deeper communication work, the deeper regulatory work, the deeper trauma work, the emotional validation, all of these become the parts of building the house. Because I see the regulatory work as the foundation work. I see all of these as being parts of building the house. They don't stand alone. They don't stand alone, but they can be very good, very effective. And I say any effective therapy for a child must also involve the family. Must also involve the family. How do you do EMDR with the family? You have mom and dad right there holding the child as the child's doing their EMDR work. You have the child right there as mom and dad are doing their EMDR work. So you create that togetherness. You create that shared experience. So many of the times therapeutic experiences are not shared. They're separate. The child does really intense work. Then we take them and meet the parents in the waiting room. The parent has no new physiologic perspective for what the child just went through. So by including, but again, that goes back to our own parent issues, hypnosis, neurofeedback, I like to think about neurofeedback. I mean, I always get that question, what do you think about neurofeedback? I think neurofeedback is great. But you know what? The parent-child system is a natural neurofeedback system. It's a natural neurofeedback system. You get the parent regulated, and they'll be more effective than that machine. But if that's not the way you work, give mom and dad neurofeedback as you give the child neurofeedback. Allow everybody to get regulated, not just one person. Allow everybody to have those opportunities. Theraplay, dance therapies, yogas, music and art therapies. You know what all of these have in connection with one another? They all include the body. They all include the right hemisphere. They're all emotional. They're all emotional. That's what all of these have in connection with one another. Leave the child at home and bring the parents in for a play session. Watch their play. Watch their play. You see wonderful things happen. Help them play with their child by following their child instead of always having to lead them. So all of these can be effective adjuncts.
That's a question I get, especially after watching these two the families that I worked with some time ago. The parents felt totally inept that had to play with their children.
Right.
And they looked to me to tell them how to do that. And I froze.
Right. Right.
Okay. And so what do you do with how do you teach them how to play with their kids?
So the question was, as a therapist, how do you teach the parents how to play with their children? And the way you do that, the way I've always done it, is by modeling it. I used to go to Washington State, and work with a single mother and her little 3-year-old who was very hyperactive. And mom didn't know how to play. She was very cognitive. So I would get out in the front yard with the 3-year-old and roll around and jump up, and the 3-year-old would jump and tackle me, and we'd play. And so mom could see that, and she said, that helps me so much by seeing how you play with her. So you do it by modeling, which as a therapist, if you never had a parent play with you, then you don't know how to play. And so the other part that I really encourage parents to do is play around what's comfortable for you. Don't try to play with Barbies if you've never been able to play with Barbies. Like with my daughter, I don't play Barbies. I just don't do good playing Barbies. But we can play catch, we can go to the park, we can wrestle, we can do all that, but my tolerance for Barbies is not good. So that's where I wouldn't choose to play Barbies. So I choose some of the things that I'm more comfortable with, because I was one of the children that didn't have parents to play with them. And so it's hard for me to play. So it's been a self-teaching for me to play, and that's just by being mindful and really engaging myself to engage my children in things that they enjoy playing. So I teach through modeling. Anyone else? Bishop T.D. Jakes says, if you always do what you've always done, you will always be where you've already been. How does this apply to us as therapists? If we keep doing what we've always done, we're going to keep getting the same results. And we can't continue to put it back on the family. Well, I'm an expert. It must be that family. Well, after 50 to 100 families, you got to start looking in the mirror. You got to start looking in the mirror and seeking to do something different. But that's challenging our own stress. It's challenging our own fear to move outside of what we get comfortable with. And try to move into that place of discomfort, because you're only going to grow in discomfort. You're not going to grow in a comfortable place. You're only going to grow in discomfort. So the question is, are you ready to do something different? Has this been valuable enough to give you some insights that might help you to do just a little bit different? I'm not asking you, and not encouraging you to attempt to do the work that I was doing here. I've been doing this intensity of work for 7 years straight. 7 years straight. I have a really good feel, and I'm still learning and growing. But what I am encouraging you to do is take a step in that direction. See how comfortable you feel. Ask yourself, because you notice I did, and there's lots of processing we can do around touch. I did lots of touch. Why? Because I feel comfortable. Does that challenge all of the ethics? Does that challenge all the fears? Yes, but did you know that that is not an ethical guideline? It's not an ethical guideline. We actually have a fear that it is. We say it's ethics because of all the issues involved. But not touching or not touching is not an ethical guideline. You're not supposed to sleep with your client. That's an ethical guideline. But touching is not. And we're not aware of that. And the reality is you don't touch unless you feel comfortable as the therapist. Because if you're touching someone because you're trying to do a therapeutic technique, you're going to feel uneasy about it, and then it's going to get misread. And then you will find yourself in an ethical situation. So you only touch according to what you're comfortable with. So I say go very slow. Go very slow. And get advanced training. Get advanced training with people who are already doing it. So you can have the experience of doing it more. That's probably more important than anything. Is just continue to train and to grow. So what can you do? First, you can understand. You must understand the critical importance of family work. And then it says, be courageous. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward in its midst. So you have to understand how important it is, and then be courageous enough to approach it, to make a step in that direction. And remember, anytime you work with someone else's parents, just like unconsciously you're working with your own. Understand the dynamic of fear. That is really important. Not only fear for our clients, but how fear plays out for us. How fear comes up for us in our lives. Listen to the behavior, will allude to the solution. Instead of always focusing on the behavior, listen to it. Listen to the behavior because it'll lead you to what's underneath it. It'll lead you to what's deeper. Advocate for responsibility and not blame. We want to be response-able and not reactive, because as long as we're reactive, we're disempowered. We're disempowered. We want to live our responsible life, and we want to teach parents how to be able to do that. But it starts with us as therapists. The linguistics that we use when we talk to parents. It all starts with us. Be mindful of yourself first and teach others the same. So as you be mindful of yourself, as you're attempting to create that secure base, then you can start to teach that parent the same. And as you can teach that parent, then they start to be the catalyst for their children. That's the biggest work you can do, is the parent work. The biggest work you can do. Because we, in the lives of our children, are the most important people in this world. Their foundation is established by us. That is the absolute most important work you can do. Is work with those parents, because they influence those children, bottom line, from A to Z. And you'll work as hard as you can to try to engage them. It's not always easy. It's not always easy. Have faith. Have faith that you can make a difference. Have faith that it's going to be okay. Have faith to get in the midst of something and go, oh my God, what am I doing? And keep going. Trust the process rather than being so consumed by the outcome. Trust the process. When in doubt, consult or refer, because you're not out there by yourself. And one of the single worst things I've ever heard come from a therapist's mouth, which came from someone who considered themselves an expert in attachment, was to tell a parent, your child has had the best therapy that they can have. We've done all that we can do for them. You need to just leave them in this residential treatment center and go home and try to make the best of your family that you can. That's the single worst thing I've ever heard come from a therapist's mouth. Because in that moment, that therapist is acting like God, saying that I'm the end-all, be-all, and giving those families, that family, no hope. No hope at all. And so leaving them both lost. leaving them both lost. So don't give up. And when you're confused and overwhelmed, consult or refer. Because there's always someone out there who has some alternative that they can offer. In closing, let us love not in word or speech, but in truth and action. And that's what we do when we sit down in front of our patients. It's truth and action. It's not words and speech. It's about how we feel when we're doing and we're saying it. Alan Shore says the core of the self is nonverbal and unconscious, and it lies in patterns of affect regulation. It's not about what we do. It's not about what we say. It's about how we feel when we're doing and saying it. So God bless you, and thank you for being here. What I want to do is just do a little bit of processing from the lecture and from the work that I did with the two ladies. But I also want to acknowledge, just for everyone that would be watching this, that you all are at a different level of experience because you've done a therapist boot camp, you've been going through the advanced therapist boot camp, so you all have a level of experiential knowledge that other therapists may not have. So I want to state that. But what kind of things came up that were significant for you just in listening to the talk itself, and was it, and then watching the work?
What do you do when you're entering into that with a client and you're getting to some really meaty issues and something for yourself rises up at that time? How do you respond to that? What do you do with that when you realize that maybe something was triggered, or there's some of your own pain that's surfacing?
I think there's two pieces to that. One, I think traditionally, typically, that's so unconscious, we would never know that it comes up. And if we did, we would be more likely to project it onto the client. But when you actually do become aware that it comes up, then you become mindful of it. And when it comes up, you acknowledge it right there to yourself. And it may be as simple as just, kind of putting your hand on your heart, or saying to your client, wow, I really feel that. I really feel that. And just acknowledging it, and then allowing that to continue to allow you to be in their process without taking you out of their process, by becoming consumed or overwhelmed with it. And at some point you do become consumed or overwhelmed with it, you just say, you know what, that's really big, and that's really touching me at a deep level. Just give me a minute to be with that, and just kind of honor that space for you, because that gives them an opportunity also, because the therapeutic process it's a reciprocal, mutual, interactive process. So that gives them an opportunity to actually be honored in what they're feeling. And sometimes you're dealing with people who've never had anyone cry for them, never felt like it was okay to cry themselves. And so to get touched and to allow yourself to open up and be open can really move someone. And if it does nothing more, it establishes a deeper openness in the physiology. Because by honoring yourself, you're actually opening up at a cellular level, which allows you to create more regulatory communication between the hemispheres and between the body.
Which further validates their experience,
Absolutely.
which is what we really want to
Definitely.
do. That's where we want to go. Okay,
Definitely.
thank you.
So what you're saying is it's okay to cry?
Oh, it's definitely okay to cry.
Because tears come up for me just when I see somebody in that much pain. I can just feel the tears coming if they're saying that.
Like today that happened.
Sure.
Both of the women sharing the depth of their
Absolutely.
hugeness, and that they were just starting to address that.
And not only is it okay to cry, sometimes I've begun crying before my patients could cry. And sometimes, just to address something, I use the word clients because that's typical. I like to use the word patients because that comes from a Greek word, it means to suffer. So it means one in suffering. And we do suffer. You know, it's not a client, it's a patient, because I want to be with that person in their suffering. So that's why I use that terminology. But yes, not only is it okay to cry, I've actually started crying before my clients, and as soon as I would start crying, they would open.
You give them permission.
That would open. It's just like the same with the parent. If the parent holds the child and says, or the spouse holds the other spouse and says, okay, get it out. Let them out. Come on, give me your feelings. We're here. Come on, let's do it. The person lays there. What am I supposed to do? It would be no different in the work that you all were doing. The person supporting you said, okay, come on, go, get it out. No felt sense, no connection, which means no support. And it's different if your crying becomes your process and takes you out of their process. Now that's the other piece. And I've seen therapists start crying and literally climb in their client's lap.
Not okay.
Not okay. Not okay. Not okay. That's right. That's right.
How about the same with anger? Sometimes I get really angry for them, especially when they're struggling to be angry and they've maybe just had somebody really hurt them. Part of me, I can say, oh, I feel angry for you.
Right.
And then they kind of go,
Right.
and can't go there. Do you just kind of just let that go? Okay, so you're not ready to be, or?
Yes, that's a part of the physiologic exchange. That's a part of the dance, because you don't want to overwhelm someone with anger that they can't express. So you don't want, and it's important to allow yourself to honor that anger, because that's your passion. Okay, it's important to say, God, that makes me so angry. It makes me so angry, and I see that you can't be angry. It's really hard for you to be angry. So you can honor that piece of it, but then if the anger becomes big and you say, come on, you can do it, just be angry, I know you can do it, I'm so mad for you, come on, you can do it. And then they start to get really shut down, or they even try. And then when they can't, they end up feeling inadequate. And so we don't want to overpower their process. And that's a real dance.
And a feel for it, I'm sure comes with doing it.
Absolutely.
But it's something about put it out there and see what they can do with it
Yes,
or not.
absolutely. Put it out there, watch the dance, see what they do with it. It's just like with Julie, the lady I was working with. There was anger there. I could feel it. And she, attempted to go into it, and she had went into it for what she could and what she was ready for. But it's a big chunk of anger. And if I am insistent, come on, you can do it, then she walks away feeling like, God, I couldn't do it. I suck.
Or if she does it, she's doing it out of pleasing you.
Or if she doesn't, it's not
It's
authentic.
about performance.
Right, right. And generally, if it's not authentic, you will feel it, because a person will only go so far. And but you definitely want to listen.
I've noticed you encourage them into their emotion, but when it seems to be the right point, then you tell them that they can, you say open your eyes or pull back or stop for a minute. What are you looking for that tells you that it's time to push forward or it's time to pull back?
First of all, it depends on the person. And right away, with both of them, and also just the little bit of their history, you hear that they're easily hypo-aroused, which is going to make them very easily dissociative. So they're going to go away very fast. And so you see that in the person. You acknowledge that for them and say, how does that feel? Does that feel right for you? And then you acknowledge, well, when feelings get really high, you're going to it's just conditioned. You're going to go away. And so as you're pushing them into the feelings, you watch for the dissociation, which could be in the eyes. They may start out like this, and then they'll just go, nothing. And you just watch the subtle cues in the face and also the feeling, because they can be very emotional and very starting to get into the emotions, and all of a sudden your body will feel like it flatlines. Doo. You know, it's almost like it's going doo 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 doo, and all, just like that goes doo, and your body will feel it. And you say you went away. Now the dance is you want to help them to come up before they shut down, to give them more control over that automatic reaction that their body has. So you're watching them and you're getting them a little intense. We want to push, but also with this person, you don't want to push over the edge to where they shut down. So you want to push, helping them come up, then they can see it. Okay, and then they can go back to it. And every time you can stop them and they can go back to it, they get a little safer in going into it. And that's one of the things Peter Levine, who does a lot of the shock trauma work, that's one of his techniques, is he calls it trauma titration, where you titrate into the trauma, then you pull back out of it. The significance of that, in my opinion, is that the titrating into it and the pulling back out of it has to be for the client, and it can't be because of the therapist's fear. And I think sometimes when you're pushing someone into it, they're titrating into it, I think sometimes the therapist's fear comes up, and so then we pull them out of it. You want to allow that to be on the client's, on the patient's process. So they titrate into it because they may be going into it and be able to really go into it. But then if you stop them and pull them back out of it, that's not about their process. That's about your process. Because the reality is if you can help them go into it and really validate it, then you can give them a new perspective on it. And naturally, if they go into something really deep, processing with them and helping them to integrate it, and make sure you have the time to be able to support them to come back and do more work when they need to do it. So all of that plays out in this work. I don't want to push any of these ladies so deep that tomorrow I couldn't see them if I needed to. I know that I could see either of those. I won't need to, but I know that I could, and they know that if they needed to, I would just be a phone call away. So you don't want to push anyone too deep, and then they don't have the resources to support to be able to continue their integration process.
How do you know when, it's not that it's time to give up, but when you have given that opportunity to a parent and you've got your fear in check and they still just can't get regulated for themselves, and you know that you've got these kids who really need it, and you've spent these sessions with the parent and doing the one-on-one, and they can't go, they can't get to that emotional place, they can't get expressive, and you talk about even the fear of going there, and you kind of tried to do all these avenues. What then? I mean, and then how do you help a family when the parent can't?
Well, at that point, when the parents are feeling really stuck in their process, you can bring the child in. Okay, have the child come into the parent's life, even if the child, even if they would at that point. Some children will. And then have the parent go through the process of trying to encourage the child to go into their feelings. The child's not going to go. Or if they do go, then watch the parent's reaction, how overwhelmed they get. And then as soon as you get that reaction, or as soon as you get that connection to maybe the child won't go any deeper, then you bring it back to the parent. How does that make you feel? Because, it was really a struggle for you to go there. What does this make you feel when you see it really hard for your child to go there? So you put it back on the parent's process. The child gets very emotional, the parent reacts, then you say, okay, Johnny, or hang on, Johnny, what are you feeling right there, Mom? What's that for you, Dad? And help him to touch that, because a lot of times it is just too scary and they just go numb around it. And so they may need some catalyst, and that's oftentimes why they're in therapy. Their children are punching their buttons. If their buttons weren't there, they wouldn't get pushed, but a lot of times they don't want to go there. So those are some ways that you can do that, to give them opportunities to be more emotionally available, but then take that opportunity back into their own process.
And then it's good modeling for the child.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right, I've had parents to bring in Johnny Johnny is the problem, Johnny is the identified patient, fix Johnny. And parents truly don't want anything to do with therapy. I'm not the one having the problem, Johnny is, fix Johnny, and they are adamant with that. Can you give some tips, strategies as to how to perhaps?
Well, I think that, tips and strategies are only going to take you so far if they are adamant that they're not going to do the work. But I say, okay, let's leave Johnny here. You guys come in, because I need to get a little bit of history. I need to get a grasp of what's going on. And then in that process, as they're talking and they're starting to touch on what's Johnny doing, then I kind of tie in a little bit. And how does that make you feel when he does that? And kind of bring into their emotional piece a little bit. Not too much to make them feel overwhelmed. Because basically what they're saying is, I'm just really scared. I'm really scared. I just don't want to go there because you're just going to blame me. You're going to make it all my fault. It's not my fault. It's all about him. So that's what they're saying. I'm really sensitive. So not too much to make them feel like you're doing any therapy with them. And then you say, you know what? The best that I can do is work with you guys to support you, to encourage you to do some things with Johnny. Because you guys are the catalyst to change. I don't have the power in this relationship. But I can support and educate and help you guys understand where Johnny's at, so then we can understand where Johnny's at. So I need to be able to work with you guys so I can support your family.
So that's a dance too.
That's a dance too. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you can always tell them, look, this is what I found to be most effective. And so this is what I do. And I totally understand if you don't want to do that. If that doesn't feel good to you, if that doesn't feel right to you, Johnny, Dan right down the hall, he'd be happy to see Johnny Bumps. Dan's a good therapist too. And, you can go right down the hall and see him, because I understand, because it can just be too overwhelming to think that you could have some responsibility in this. Okay, because it's not about blame. It's about responsibility. What happened with your parents? How was your relationship with your parents? Did they ever take responsibility, or did they just blame you? And now we all are blaming Johnny. So it's not your fault, but we got to take some responsibility. And always giving them that free out. You can go down to Dan down the hall, because as soon as you say you can go down to Dan down the hall, they start thinking, well, shoot, what? Dan must not be very good. And you send me down there that quick. So it's a dance also.
The other things what Martha used to say, that, I've said to some mothers, I don't believe I can fix your kid. I believe mothers can fix their kids. Okay? And that most mothers want to fix their kids when they're in trouble. Okay? And when I've said that to mothers, every time, mothers said, well, yeah, that's true. Okay? What Brian was talking about earlier today, they don't want to really bring their kid to somebody else and say, fix them.
Right.
Okay? And they only do that because they're scared.
Sure.
When you say, I trust you to do this, okay, and I think that's what you really want to do. Dads are different matter. But moms say, yeah. Tell me how.
Yeah. And that's important, and just that statement Roy has made, because that's, for me, been a real growing part of my work, is actually looking at attachment not just from the perspective of mother-child, but realizing that Dad, and oftentimes, more times than not, Dad is the catalyst to that attachment. And I like to think in the context of the Bible says the sins of the forefathers would be passed down to the second and third generations. It says sins of the forefathers, not foremothers. And a lot of times it's a failure on the part of fathers to support and to encourage moms to feel supported and encouraged enough to connect to the children. And so it's a very important piece that I think we miss a lot in therapy, because who's the scariest person in the therapy office? Dad is. Dad is. Woo-hoo-hoo. Don't want to deal with Dad.
As a follow-up to that, I was thinking when you were doing one of the role modeling with one of the people that you were at role model, in terms of having the child sit or lay in mom's lap. And I was wondering then, what if dad had the quote unquote better relationship? Would it have been beneficial had dad, if dad was present, had dad had the child in his arms and then maybe mom be the catalyst?
Actually, in that dynamic that you just mentioned, I would have had dad holding mom first. Because if dad's got the better relationship, then obviously mom's not feeling supported enough to have the relationship with the child she needs to have. So I would have dad holding mom first to help mom develop whatever frame of reference she needed to then be able to connect to the child. And so from that process, after mom, because the real work at that point is going to be between mom and the child. You know, I might would do something with dad and the child, but if I could get dad holding mom first and get her frame of reference established, then I'm going to move immediately to mom and the child, because that's where the real work needs to happen.
And I'm wondering too whether or not some dads feel, in a sense, left out of that process.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's a social phenomenon of male depression and helplessness. And as therapists, we make that possible too, because we don't include dad enough. We don't hold dad's role in the importance that it is. You know, we say, and especially traditional attachment approaches, this is a mom and child issue. And even I mean, it's even been said that before a child can attach to the father or to anyone else, he's got to attach to mom first, which is making almost a virtually impossible situation occur and creating so much more stress and overwhelm. Because it's making mom even more responsible for the child and giving dad an opportunity to feel even more helpless. Because dad's not all of a sudden going to encourage mom and say, honey, you can do it. Dad's going to back out of the picture and say, see, I really don't matter. And he's just going to fall further out of the picture.
Brian, earlier in the day you were talking about when you're working with the parents and there will come times when you stop doing that. You pick them apart individually, separate them so that you can work with maybe the mom or maybe the dad individually. What would be some circumstance for that?
So what would be some circumstances for when you might separate the couple in their work? It's usually going to happen in the initial sessions, the first couple of sessions where there's lots of hostility, where dad's trying to talk and mom won't let him get a word in edgewise, where every time he says something she interrupts him, or when mom says something, dad gets really angry and starts looking at her and saying mean things, being hurtful.
So they can't really support.
They're not connected, and they're just creating more of a hostile. Just like the role play that Debbie and Roy did, I wouldn't have separated them. I mean, she needed to be honored, and by honoring and validating her exactly where she was at, I'd be able to help her come into realizing we're still trying to work on this. So that wouldn't have been cause to separate. But if there would have been the hostility, the aggressive energy that just wasn't allowing any individual expression, then I might separate them. And people oftentimes say, well, what about sexual abuse? First of all, rarely are you going to even have a client that comes in and there's sexual abuse occurring. Because if it's occurring and hadn't been reported, they're not coming to therapy. And if they do, then you're going to sense almost, if you're open to it, you're going to sense almost immediately something's going on that doesn't need to be going on. And you'll sense that usually in the perpetrator, and a lot of times in the way the victim is responding. And I've never had it happen. I mean, I've had it happen where a teenage girl felt very uncomfortable with her father, but it was more of her feeling afraid of him, just feeling afraid of him emotionally. Because they didn't have a relationship, because she was so afraid that her mother was going to go away. So she couldn't be open to her father. Once they started, I had them start doing date nights and things of that nature, then that dynamic changed.
Do you bring the couple back together?
Oh yes, yeah, could be same session. Could be the same session. Because basically what I want to do is tone it down by acknowledging it a little bit. and creating the space just to get in and do some intense work. Because it can be almost magical to separate the couple, then bring one of the people back in, get them in arms, and one person cracks open with tears, and the other person goes. I've had so many moms say, oh my God, I haven't seen you cry in 40 years. I've never seen you cry. And then as soon as that happens, it just changes their physiology and makes them more open. So you could do it in the same session. It may take a couple sessions.
I have a question about the touch part. And I saw how you were doing it with the two women that did the example. Parts of it make a lot of sense. I know you contain with the knees. I know you put your hand over them. And then I think of some of the work we've done, really intense work that needs body
Lots of
containment. And two questions. One is, how do you do that sitting up? Or do you do it sitting up? And two is, how do you do it as one person?
Very good questions. And typically, someone is not going to go any further than what you can handle. They will go as far as you can handle.
Physically as well.
Physically as well. And sitting up, you take the hands. That's one way that I do it, as I did with Julie. Because that way I can anchor me and I can anchor her and give her as much containment as possible. Okay? But if that becomes too much, then I might have her lay down on the couch and sit beside her on the couch and put my arms there around her like that. No. But a lot of times you're only going to get as much as you can handle. You're not going to get any more than that. And if you do, what's going to happen is they're going to get out, and as soon as they get out, they're going to go, wow. Well, if it starts getting really big, you can slow them down. Slow them down. And I like to encourage saying, stay with you. Stay with you, because it's so easy in the midst of a really intense emotional experience to want to get ourselves out. You know, even if we're not trying to get away from the therapist or run from the therapist or get out of the hole, we want to run. And so you say to that person, stay here. Open your eyes. Stay here. Stay with you. Brings them back to their body. Because that's really the process. You don't want people flailing out here. You want to put an emotional expression to it. And as they can put emotional expression to it, then they can honor it.
You wouldn't wrap them in a blanket.
I wouldn't wrap them in a blanket. No, I just wouldn't see any real need to do that. I would.
Containment verbally, is what you're saying.
Yes, I'd want to be able to contain them emotionally, verbally, to allow them to have an opportunity to be able to contain themselves. See, that's the other thing is we feel like if I let this go, it's going to be overwhelming. I might kill someone. I might kill me. Just like as Cheryl said, it's so loud. Right? She showed me it was too loud. She needed the emotional okay that let it out.
Well, it's also empowerment, so when you're not there, they know that they can still
do
it
that
for themselves.
That's right.
So that they don't have to be dependent on us and a technique or an office or whatever. I think that's important because we tend to want it on our terms.
Yes.
Because it's what we're comfortable with.
Right. Absolutely.
I have a question that's not quite as clinical. What about the traditional use of assessments and genograms and tools and that kind of thing? What, if any, role do those play in this whole process?
I think that they can play a role. And I don't want to discount anything. I think it all plays a role at some level. And I think that it can play a role in just getting a better picture of where the client comes from. Getting some insights, because there may have been a real trauma that they put on the evaluation that doesn't come up in their work. But if you knew about it, then you could have addressed it. So, you know, I don't give it all importance. Like, oh, we got to get this done. We got to do all these evaluations. You know, that's not the most important piece, but it can definitely assist. I heard someone told me that they do a traumagram where they go and list the traumas with the person everything the person considers to be a trauma, and then they start and they work on it, and they work on each one, and sometimes one will cover 3, and then you kind of. To me, that sounds like a really neat idea. So a lot of times, I don't take the time to do it. Not that I wouldn't help me. I just don't take the time to do it. But I think it'd be very beneficial.
Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. One more question?
As a follow-up
2 more questions.
to Debbie's question, how much prep do you give the client before you see them? Because what you do is different.
Right. Well, I'll have them watch educational material, and so they have some understanding, but I think what's important about that is that you can only prepare someone so much for something that is emotional from a cognitive perspective. They can only get it so far before it becomes all emotional, because that's a whole different understanding. Absolutely. And that's you can tell anyone what they're going to do in a boot camp. And just like I use the example, well, you can't. You can tell them, but they won't get it because it's emotional. It's just like my mother-in-law who went through a parent boot camp. My mother-in-law, my father-in-law. Before the boot camp, I said, "Look, Patty, we're going to have mats on the floor. There are going to be people screaming. There's going to be tears. There's going to be snot. It's going to be very emotional. Are you sure you want to do that?" She said, "Yes." The second day of the boot camp, she said, "When you were explaining what was going to happen, I thought you were talking in metaphors." But she stayed. Yeah. She thought I was talking.
Say, why didn't you tell me?
Yeah.
I did.
Because it's emotional.
They have to see it.
Yeah.
The only way is
To experience.
now you can watch a video, and I think that's very enlightening for people to see that.
Yes.
But you cannot explain it in words.
Right.
Me neither.
Right. And that's the thing, if people, and that I get kind of mixed feedback on that. Some people say, well, I probably would have came anyway. Those are the parents who are really desperate, who really, really want it. And I think that's just the nature of the beast until it becomes the paradigm that this is what we do. Because until it becomes a paradigm that this is what we do, it's always going to be, that emotional stuff, touchy-feely stuff. Grieving, screaming. Yes. Yeah,
And
absolutely.
people do run from that.
Oh, absolutely. We run from that as a society. Definitely.
I'm not sure how to keep them from running.
You can't keep them from running from it. You can only honor that they want to run. And you honor that they want to run and ask them, to acknowledge that themselves, and then sometimes it's not so scary. They want to come back. I have a couple coming at the multifamily this week, and this guy, he's so funny. From the very first time I met him, he's like, "Oh man, this is good stuff." He said, I've been listening to this since I got those CDs. He's from Tennessee too. Since I got those CDs, it's all I've been listening to. He said, I catch myself at work, not even working, just sitting in front of the stereo, listening. and he said, "I really hope I get a chance to do some of this regulation work myself, because I really need some of that." He came up about 3 times during the first part of the little extra stuff I was doing. "Man, this sounds good. I hope I get a chance to do some of that regulation work." Came in, mats were out. Pew! Right out the door. He said, "I went out there, man, I was praying." He said, "I didn't know if I wanted to come back in here."
Been there, done that.
Yeah, and not only that, but that was when we did in Virginia, which there were a lot of anxious people there. But we had a therapist there as a parent, a therapist who had done body work before, expressive work before. She was very anxious, so she was ripe. So she got right over on the mat, First day. "Ah!" And everyone was like, oh. It was pretty intense.
Broke the ice.
Shattered it. Yeah. Absolutely. Jennifer?
But it was kind of off at where we went, but my question was around when Brooklyn was working with her mom and you were doing that role play, and when she said, when you're talking about the resistance, I want up, and you let her up, and I guess my confusion is around how do you, because when we're doing our own work, that's kind of, we still hold that, like let me go, and we keep it there. So I guess I feel confused about, I don't know either how to balance
That's
that.
good.
Do you know
That's
what I'm saying?
good. Yeah, absolutely. Two parts to that. One part is that adults, even though they stress and regress and go to that very scared place, they have much more control over their lives in every aspect of their lives. And an adult, as they're doing their work, can say, let me go, and you can have a real feeling of, do they really want you to let go, or they really want you to hold tight, you know, and not let go. And as an adult, you can honor that and respect that. And then also in my work with adults, I've had adults get really scared. Let me go, and just stayed right with them. Say I'm scared, stay with you. And in the intensity of their fear, I'm scared, and they can stay with them, because the immediate is want to just let me go. But if you can stay with that fear yourself and help them to put that back in their body, to make that connection, I'm not out of control, I'm not going to die, then you can do that. With a child, oftentimes they're so terrified already. When they say, let me go, the fear is so high, you have to honor it. Because if you don't, the fear just intensifies. And I've worked in holding therapy where we would hold the child and we wouldn't let go. We'd say, no, mom's in charge. We're not letting go. You don't control anything here. You're not getting up. You don't need to use the bathroom. Go ahead and use it if you do. You're just trying to control. Get your anger out. I've worked in that modality, and what I came to experience and see that is exhaustion. The child would fight and fight and fight in a hyper-aroused place until they go to a hypo-aroused place, and they give in, and they feel peaceful and relaxed and warm and engaging. But then what happened is they had to keep doing it over and over and over and over and over and over again. And if something you're doing is working, you don't have to keep doing it. If something you're doing with that child, holding them, letting them up, and then helping them come back, if it's working, you won't have to keep letting them up, because they'll stay there. But if it's not working, they keep fighting, then it's telling you something. It's not working. It's not honoring their core experience. And how many of these children's core experiences were denied to begin with? Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me this opportunity, sharing with me. Helps me grow.
Us too.
Helps me grow very much.